not gonna say it, somebody should. Let's talk about two-time, let's talk about bum one, yeah. Asking the questions that nobody could. Like, where are the bone thugs and are they in harmony? Do you're a helpful snowman.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm on a drive, so I'm recording for you. Part 2 of my What's Pete Been Reading? I was going to call it What's Pete Been Reading series, but it's not really a series. It's a thing I decided to do because I was like, what should I podcast about? And you know, when you're figuring out what to podcast about, here's a little insight into how this works. It's funny because, like, I feel many podcasts have gone this way, which is like, they start off with a premise or an idea or something, or not. And then back in the day, the first place a lot of them went was like, what's in the news? You know what I mean? What's the wacky news? And we'll just kind of go over the wacky news. I think people got very bored of that format because it was like, you know. The other thing, though, is it's a very hard format, I think, to do solo. Because you're like, well, if you do the wacky news with somebody else, you can kind of like bounce off each other. And when you're by yourself, you can't bounce off anyone. So, like, you know, you could do wacky news if you had a partner, because you can kind of just be like, well, you know, this is really just a way to start talking about something, and then we'll just see where it takes us, right? But that's a little harder to do, I think, by yourself. And you can't do things, you know, podcasting by yourself is weird. Because you just can't do a lot of the things that other people do in shows. You can't, for example, bounce off of somebody else by having a take on something that you're like, in your head, or maybe even the other person knows, you're like, I know this take is not reasonable. Right? Like, I know that this is a crazy thing that I'm saying, or, you know, you can't play devil's advocate, really, because there's no one talking on the other side of you. You know what I mean? There's nobody being like, but that's dumb. And it's like, it's not as fun, I think, to be devil's advocate. It makes you feel like you're Alex Jones or something, you know, because you're being devil's advocate, except it doesn't seem like you're being devil's advocate. You're just saying, I think this is correct. But anyway. Yeah, it's like, so you got to find things when you're by yourself to talk about. But then when you're doing it in the car by yourself, you really have to, like, find things to talk about that also don't require you to look at anything. Or at least not for any real amount of time. Because, you know, I live in Colorado, and so you get on the interstate, and it's like the chances of you having to slam on the brakes after going 80 miles an hour and come to a complete stop on the interstate are not zero. Not as close to zero as I would like. I would say it's a 50-50 driving about the distance that I am on the interstate. Not great odds. You don't want to be, like, looking at anything, really. I also have taken to using AI tools to edit the car ones that I do. And, you know, mixed feelings. But I guess I just wanted to tell you all that because, one, if you're like, I won't listen to anything that's been enhanced in any way by AI, then you know. And you can make that decision and, you know, fuck you. But before you turn it off, I would like to defend myself, okay? Maybe what I'll do, if I remember, I'm going to make this little section, I'll just put this section in as unedited, right? So you can hear what it sounds like. And you can hear what you'd be listening to for like 2 hours. This is what it would be like. Is this, you know, what you want to listen to? But here's the other thing, in my opinion. Um, no one's out of the job because, I don't pay anyone to edit this stuff. I do it. I do it in my own free time, and like I have to pay for everything, right? And I think using the tools makes it sound better than I am able to. And like I would like to learn how to make it sound as good as the AI tools seem to be able to, but I haven't figured it out in all these years of doing it, and like I don't think I'm close to it. So ultimately I would love to figure it out and learn how to do it and be able to do it as good, if not better, than the AI. And like I think there are people out there who are doing it as good, if not better, than the AI. And like honestly, if I had like a sponsor, you know what I mean, someone who was paying me enough money that I was like, you know what, I could pay to have an episode edited by a professional and break even, not lose money on editing, I would probably do that. You know what I mean? But none of those things are true. So like I'm kind of stuck. This is really annoying. There's a very poor merge choice happening. So anyway, and so, that's why I don't hire someone or do it myself. I can't. I'm not able to. And if I did hire someone, it would be at a financial loss. So I don't think that's reasonable. But the last thing is, I'm not editing the content. I'm not editing with AI. The AI is not generating any of this. It's repairing the sound of it. And so I guess I think that's a little bit different, because what I'm doing is not changing the content of what I'm saying or what I'm thinking. It's just making it, I think, a little more possible to listen to for the duration. I guess ultimately I feel like it's better for you all as listeners than the alternative, because the alternative would be the version that sounds like this. Because that would be the best I could do. So, there you go. That's why. That's why. Anyway, so let's return to the book list, shall we? The next on my list is a book called Gantz, Gantz. So, it's a manga, so it's probably like Dansu or something like that. I don't know, maybe it's Gantz. I don't know. I don't know what that word means, really. But I'll give you kind of a brief plot summary and then sort of tell you about it. It's a manga that is about these two teenage boys who are friends, sort of, die trying to save someone from getting hit by a train. And they wake up in this apartment, and there's this weird black orb in the apartment, and the apartment is like a normal apartment. And they wake up in this apartment with this black orb, and there's some other people there, some of whom seem to know what's going on, and some of whom who are also like, what happened? I just died. You know what I mean? I thought I was doomed. I thought I was dead. So they all kind of are in this apartment, and one person who kind of seems to know what's going on, but he's not really helping anyone else. The black orb opens up, and there are like weapons and these weird suits in them, like jumpsuits. And it's like you should put them on, and they have to score points, and that's all they know. So they get basically teleported to part of the city in Tokyo. And long story short, they have to kill these aliens that are around. And they're in disguise, the aliens, and nobody else can see them. And so it's like the other citizens of Tokyo are walking around and stuff, but they can't actually see what's happening between the aliens and the Gantz people, let's call them. Gantz is the name of the black orb. So this is all very mysterious, and like once you score enough points, you can choose to either bring someone back to life who is dead. I don't know if it has to be someone who is in the Gantz thing. I don't think it does, though. Or you can choose to be free from the Gantz game, I guess you'd call it. And maybe there's like one other choice, but I think those are the main choices. So anyway, this is a pretty long manga, and I've read like, I don't know, 9 or 10 volumes of it, and the volumes are like probably 3 or 4 times as long as those typical digest size that you see. You know, when you see them in the bookstore, and they're those paperback-ish sized volumes. This is probably like 4 of those. It's an interesting book. The art style is very interesting. The monsters are cool. There's a lot of gore. There's also a lot of pretty sexual content in the book, especially early on. It kind of seems like the early part of the book has like a ton of it. A ton of just like, you'll be in between chapters and there'll be a very cheesecakey sort of thing. And then, but that seems to have gotten a lot less prominent as it goes on. Gantz is also a bit of one of the controversies of it is like it's juvenile because of its, sexual content, which that's hard for me to comment on. It's weird, like, because I've read more manga in the past few years, and like there is a lot more sexual content in manga than in Western comics. But I think what's weird about that is like, other than the drawings and the way things are drawn, which no one in the comics comments on. It's not like Spider-Man is ever really saying anything like, Jesus Christ, Emma Frost, like, why are you running around in a bikini with a cape? She's running around in lingerie, and no one says anything. Nobody. At no point is like, even Wolverine isn't like, I mean, Emma Frost, I know she's evil, and like, sometimes she's not, I guess, but what a bait. You know what I mean? Or no one is like, have you guys ever noticed that like the ladies in our circles are like completely stacked? Like, no one has ever said anything like that. I think the closest I've ever seen, there was a Spider-Man comic where he found Psylocke from the X-Men, who is also, her outfit is basically a woman's one-piece bathing suit, which is a kind of demure for, the era or whatever. She's injured. He kind of tries to come to her rescue, but doesn't really know what to do. And it's just like, this is so weird. And like, I'm sorry, I'm the one who's here for this. I don't know what I'm doing. And he's like, I didn't even know that you were real. You know what I mean? Like, which is kind of an implication of like, I'd heard tell of this Psylocke person who was a like babe running around in a woman's one-piece bathing suit and doing X-Men stuff. But I didn't actually know that was a real thing. It kind of seemed far-fetched, and now I'm discovering, in fact, you are real. So I don't know. In some way, I think that the Japanese comics are different because there is a lot more sexual content, and there is a lot more just thrown in there. However, it's also sex is like part of the in comic world as well. So I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's a little, I don't know if that's better or worse or just different. And I've kind of landed on just different. I mean, it's easy for me as a man in his 40s to just kind of be like, whatever. It doesn't really faze me because I'm just like, well, it's not like, it's 2025. Like, if I wanted to see naked chicks, that's very available. So it's not like I have to read comics in order to see that, or that's like my, only or primary or whatever exposure to it. But also, so I'm not like into it, but it's also not something that bothers me. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm not comparing my body to a fictional 17-year-old in a Japanese comic. And, it's just not, it's not something that bothers me, and it's not something that titillates me. So it's kind of like a net zero for me. It's a little embarrassing, I guess. That's definitely the worst part. is, you're always like, I'm reading this stuff and sometimes I'm like, ugh, I don't I don't really want Poonmaster Flex to see this particular page and then have to explain like, yeah, I know this is in here, but this has like an interesting story that I'm enjoying following and so on and so forth. There's a guy online named, I think, Super Eye Patch Wolf. That's his YouTube handle. And he has a sort of video essay about Gans. And basically, he talks a lot about how it's like, yeah, it is kind of juvenile and whatever, but the story really grows. And this is something that I really like about manga is like, I have often found that a lot of manga series start off and I don't like them at the beginning. But what's different to me about them compared to American comics is a lot of times the characters actually do grow and change in super significant ways. And then those changes stick. Spider-Man will graduate high school, and then 5 years later, they'll be like, we're starting a new series called Spidey, and he's going back to his roots in high school. And that drives me fucking crazy, because I think Spider-Man was out of high school within like a year or so of the, first issue of Amazing Spider-Man. So, like, the amount of his history where he's in high school is really not significant, but that's what everybody thinks of. Everybody puts him back and they're like, let's make him younger and younger all the time. You know what I mean? And I don't know. It's like that works for people probably because it's a little easier to write, a funny, interesting character who's in high school. Sometimes I think too, maybe it's like, I think some of the appeal of Spider-Man is that he can screw things up. He's not perfect. You know what I mean? And if you make him a teenager, those screw-ups are forgivable because you're like, I don't know, he doesn't know what he's doing. No one knows what they're doing when they're 17. You know what I mean? And so it's a lot. And it's a little bit more understandable. So I don't know. Anyway, I find a lot of manga, starts off at a place that I don't love. I mean, my beloved Berserk is that way, right? The first volume of it or whatever, I didn't love the first time I read it. And, I kind of kept going and I was really glad I did. But it took probably until volume 4 or 5 to really, for me, be like, oh my, like I'm starting to understand why people like this. It's more of a journey than a lot of American comics are. American comics will have an arc, but then it ends, and it's kind of like, it's like a sitcom, versus a prestige TV limited series, where a sitcom, it's like, well, we have to have everything kind of reset at the end of the episode. If we learn a lesson, it has to be a vague lesson that we probably won't encounter again. Because then people will be like, don't you remember that time that you did this exact sort of thing? I know it's not exactly the same. But, it's like you can't do a Saved by the Bell where Zach Morris is dating a blind girl. And, he's kind of like being a dick about it. And then 2 episodes later have him date a deaf girl and he's being a dick about it in the same way. It's like, well, that kind of destroys the universe for me, because it's like, wouldn't he apply the lesson he learned? But you can't do that in a sitcom because it doesn't work, right? But in like prestige TV, it's a lot closer to, I think, the way Japanese comics work, just because it's like you can have a character in Breaking Bad actually die. You know what I mean? That works. That's allowed. You can have a character make a significant change. You can do stuff. Which is, I think, part of why prestige TV is like captured a lot of people's imagination, is because it's like things can actually happen. It's not just anything can happen. It's like things can happen. This is amazing. I could be watching an episode and seeing a character that I've seen 10 times and gotten to know. They might not make it out of this episode. I don't know. So anyway, I think the video essay by Super Eye Patch Wolf is good as far as like it explains a little bit of why the series is good and like why it's worth reading, and kind of how you kind of have to hang in there. And maybe that's like the case for everyone's first manga series until they find the one that works for them. Is like you kind of just have to hang in there and get used to it. And just accept some things, and then sort of be like, okay, I don't know. Next is a book called The Deviant by James Tinian the Fourth. The fourth? The sixth? The fifth? James Tinian the Number. He's a writer I like a lot of comics, and this one's about, I think, a serial killer, if I remember correctly, who dresses as Santa. Which is an interesting, it's like there's been so many movies and stuff where a serial killer dresses as Santa, but I'm wondering if that's ever happened in real life. You know what I mean? I don't know why. I mean, I do know why, I guess. It's like, it makes sense to have a serial killer dress as Santa for your movie or whatever, because it's like, I mean, Santa's pretty fucking public domain, right? Like, we could just have him, if we can find a Santa costume, he can wear that shit. We don't have to pay anybody. Who are we paying? The North Pole? Fuck you. It is a weird comic in that it's a little bit like, it does this weird thing where it's like sort of about a gay guy who's exploring this serial killer who I think is also gay. And sort of like, is there any connection there? My memory of it is it's a gay guy who's investigating this serial killer. And the serial killer is, I think, gay as well. And it's sort of got this implication where the investigator is like, there's a lot of parallels between me and this serial killer. You know what I mean? And like, whatever. And it's sort of got this weird thing of like, it doesn't make it seem like James Tinian is suggesting that being gay is in any way related to being a serial killer. And I know he's not, because he's written a lot of comics, and a lot of them have like LGBTQ stuff going on. And he's very pro all of that. You know what I mean? I don't think he's doing that. And I don't think it's like he doesn't realize that he's walking a line there. It's odd. I mean, in some ways, I think it's good, because it's like, I'll tell you, one of my beefs from like 2016, which is like 10 years ago, Marvel launched a bunch of new heroes and stuff and was trying to diversify and all that. All good. But I was something I've always thought is like, I want to see some more other non-superhero characters in comics who are, not white guys. In other words, like, I think representation to me, I guess, I'm an adult, so it's different. But this is a comic book about a serial killer who dresses as Santa Claus, and, another guy being like, what separates me from him? Right? So this is not for kids. For me, it's like representation of the real world, or like representation of things. I'm like, well, shouldn't there be like some, LGBTQ bad guys and stuff? You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know. Part of me thinks like, well, representation, I think, would work better if it was like, yeah, there are some superheroes who are gay, and here's a villain who's gay. You know what I mean? Because it's like, yeah, I guess, being gay is like a part of who a person is, but it doesn't necessarily determine your path or something. You know what I mean? It would be sort of like if comic books didn't focus on superheroes for some reason, because we lived in a weird parallel, much more boring universe. And instead, it was all about careers. And so you had like plumber comics, and you had electrician comics and stuff like that. And it was like, well, only these careers will gay people be characters, and these careers they won't. I know that's a weird take. I'm not really saying like, hey, fair's fair, there should be some gay bad guys, so we could gay bash them or something. It's just more like, I don't know. I think it would be more interesting that way. I don't know. That's just me though. Anyway, the book overall, it was fine. I have a hard time with comics these days. Like I found as I grow older, I have a harder time remembering the storyline. So I could never read a comic like month to month anymore. I have to read like chunks. And preferably like with something like The Deviant, I'm like, you know what? I would just rather read this when it's done than read the whole thing. Cause then I'll remember what's going on and like I won't have to try and clue myself in. I think a lot of times I feel that the sort of monthly publication schedule that comics are on is like an outdated publication format. I just don't think it works. I don't think it's to the benefit of the reader or the industry, but that's just me. Okay, I'm going to tell you about I read 2 Doctor Doom comics. Doctor Doom, like the probably ultimate Marvel bad guy. Depending on how you feel about a couple people, like your Thanoses and whatnot. I mean, Thanos is awesome because, like, he was like, I'm going to kill everybody. Okay, here's something that people don't know about these Marvel movies. A detail the Marvel movies left out, which was probably smart. Because this is a really weird story and it wouldn't work, I don't think, in a movie. But a weird thing in the comic book version of what would be Infinity War or the Infinity Gauntlet story, basically Thanos wants to impress Death. And Death is portrayed as this, like, berobed woman, but with a skull for a head. And, he's like, what would impress Death is if I killed, like, everybody. And you're like, well, yeah, I guess that probably would. If someone was like, you have to impress Death or something bad would happen. I mean, I guess I would be like, well, if I kill everyone and I've impressed Death, what happens? You know what I mean? If I've destroyed everything, what remains? What do we do now? But anyway, that's kind of the storyline from the comics, which is very wacky. And this is probably why I prefer comics to the movies, because the movies are a little bit more, Thanos is like, I'm going to kill half of people because there's just not enough universe for everyone, which, doesn't really make sense. But we don't need to belabor that, right? We don't need to get into like, well, he could have just snapped his fingers and doubled the resources. But, fuck it, whatever. We're at the standstill. We made it. We made it to the part where my speedometer is on the 0. On the interstate. Speed limit, 75. It's awesome. It's so awesome. So anyway, it's very wacky. So, he's probably the ultimate bad guy in some way, but in some ways I prefer Doctor Doom because I think he's wackier, but also he's more in the constraints of like what I'll call reality, which isn't, I mean, he's like a techno wizard dictator, which is weird. But I guess it just, he's more complicated and more interesting to me. Whereas, Thanos is like, okay, he's a big purple guy who could probably punch people really good and whatever. So, but here's the thing. I kind of like my Doctor Doom either super pragmatic and evil and smart or silly. There's a book in an Avengers book written by Brian Clevenger where Doom has some really great lines where he's like, someone's like, I don't even know how it comes up, but they're like, how are we going to get into this? Doom is like, how are we going to enter this, citadel or whatever? And someone's like, I thought we would just kind of go in through the front. and he's like through the door like a peasant. You know what I mean? And you're just like, yeah, that's awesome. That's ridiculous and awesome that he's like, doors are for peasants. And it just immediately brings up questions in your mind, comedy questions like, if he thinks doors are for peasants, how does he enter a room? You know what I mean? All this stuff, but it's fine. It doesn't matter. They don't answer it. No one brings it up. It's just like, oh, that doom, and we all move on. And I think both of the Doom books I read in this case were, neither was really either of those kind of Doctor Doom. So it's kind of just like, I don't know. Doctor Doom seems like at times, if you watch The Simpsons, there would be characters that kind of came into vogue for the writers. They're like, at some point, they were all like, I want to do a Mr. Burns episode. You know what I mean? Or I want to do a Moe episode or whatever. And they would kind of seem like they would have characters who were popular for a little while. And I think Doom is like one of those perpetually for comic writers, which is like, I want to do my take on Doom. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I'm just not that into him. The other thing that was really interesting, though, is one of the books. So I read this digitally through the library. So, it's not worth being angry about, but it was like a Doom comic, and it was a deluxe edition, and it's like 400 pages or something. And I was like, oh, okay, this will be pretty significant. I'm reading this book, and it's like wrapping up pretty quick. And I was like, where is this going? And I was like, oh, maybe this is going to have sometimes what comics will do. I don't think they do this as much anymore, but for a very long time, they would often be like Spider-Man, and it would be like, I don't know, Spider-Man's greatest battles. And they would reprint a bunch of old shit in the back. Or they would do something like this. They would have Spider-Man fight Venom. You know what I mean? And it's like a new story where they're fighting again. And then they'd be like, as a bonus, we are going to quote unquote throw in, the first time that Spider-Man and Venom ever clashed. And they'll throw in 3 issues in the back from like the, 1980s. And you're like, yeah, I mean, I don't really need that because I could read those comics in something else. You know what I mean? This isn't like necessary history. It seems like a cheap way for them to recycle material to kind of pad something out. And that's definitely what was going on here, because the modern version of it is they're like, we'll reprint the script with no images. So like what the writer scripted. And then we'll reprint like the pencils. So uninked or, maybe lightly inked, no colors, stuff like that. So you can see all the layouts and stuff. Now, like, I enjoy sometimes if a comic does some of this. Like if they're like, here's 1 page of the script and, maybe the writer gives some commentary on like, we thought this particular page was interesting for reasons X, Y, Z, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But reprinting the whole script of the comic that I just read with like no real commentary or anything, or maybe like 2 lines of, yeah, I turned in the script and then the artist did a great job. And I'm like, oh, great. First of all, I think I'll be the judge of that, whether or not he did a great job. But secondly, I'm just like, I mean, this isn't really adding content. This is just adding filler. It's like if you watched, if you see a movie that works this way, if you watch Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, and like the first 45 minutes are basically just a replay of Silent Night, Deadly Night, which apparently Silent Night, Deadly Night was the movie. I swear this wasn't planned. I know this sounds like it, but where Psycho dressed up as Santa is killing people. And, I guess a bunch of parent groups and stuff like that came out against it, and it had a very limited run in theaters. And so then they made Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, and the first, 45 minutes of it is mostly a recap of Silent Night, Deadly Night. I mean, and by recap, I mean, the footage from Silent Night, Deadly Night. And I guess that what they decided to do, because they were like, we didn't really get to make any money off this movie, and now the fervor has died down of people being against it. So like, let's figure out a way to re-release it, basically. And so someone was like, well, we'll make a number 2, and then what? It's mostly scaffolding to re-release Silent Night, Deadly Night 1. And a way to trick people into being like, oh, I'll go see that. You know what I mean? It's a new movie. And then they're like, wait, what the fuck? But at the time of its release, very few people would have seen Silent Night, Deadly Night 1. So whatever. Also, it's not like you really need to have seen the first one to understand. You know what I mean? It's like seeing Scream 2. And you're like, well, I mean, it's probably better if you've seen Scream 1, but not like necessary. You get the gist pretty fast, which is like, oh, okay, so a knifey guy was running around killing people. Got it. And it turned out it was, there was more going on than there appeared. The twist ending. The end. Anyway. So, I don't know, it just seemed like, yeah, if a movie does it, I think we're easily acknowledging, like, this seems like a lot of filler. You know what I mean? I don't know that I feel good about paying full price to see this film. But comic books do it all the time. I mean, it's crazy, too, because, like, a novel would never do this. Like, you never see a novel, and they're like, here's the original first draft of the novel. Just graft it into the back. And, we don't really tell you that that's what's going on. So you're like, oh my God, look how long this book is. I'm getting a great value for my money. Which, by the way, let's just deviate a little bit. I am so tired of like publishers operating that way and doing the thing where it's like, for people to think they're getting a good value for their money, the book has to be X length. I don't give a fuck how long the book is if it's good. I will pay the same amount for a 170-page good book that I will for a, 240-page book that's 170 pages of a good book and then some other shit. Albums, same thing. This doesn't even matter anymore because no one cares. I remember back in the day, I bought, like, the Weezer Green album. And I remember reading about everybody saying, like, it's not even 40 minutes long. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a ripoff. But to me, it was like, I don't know, I'm fine with a 40-minute album that I like. And I don't really need you to add 4 or 5 songs of shit. You know what I mean? Just to make me feel like it's justified to buy it. If you got 10 songs and they're like 2.5 to 3 minutes, that's fine. I'm fine with that. It doesn't bother me. But like books and comics are, to me, like the king of that, where I'm just like, you don't have to add extra stuff to this to like make me think it's a good deal. Because all that ends up happening, if I had purchased it, I would have been pissed. Because I would have been like, so what you mean by deluxe is just extra stuff that's the same stuff. Now, I mean, this would be cool, like, if you wanted to learn how to write comics, this would be interesting, right? Like, that would be something cool to see. But you can get that, you know what I mean? You can find that, or you can seek that out, or like, I think it'd be great if they wanted to make that kind of thing more available. If they were like, well, let's put out more books that are like, here's the process and how it was put together. And there are tons of those books. So it's not like that's hard to find. I mean, something like this probably would have been a lot more interesting in like the 90s, when you're like, there's not really a lot of resources on like how a comic book gets comic booked. But today, there's plenty. Next is a book I read called Overlord. This is the first I've read of what's called a Japanese light novel. Light. And I guess these are like oftentimes writers who would like to write a manga, but they don't have drawing skill. So they put it into a novel, and I don't know exactly why it's called a light novel. I don't know if this is because it's like kind of like their version of a YA, or if it's the subject matter, or if they're like, this is kind of like I'd like to be a manga. I have no fucking idea. But anyway, a lot of light novels do eventually get turned into manga and TV shows and stuff. This is one called Overlord. And basically, it's a guy playing a game that's like World of Warcraft, and he gets sucked into the game. It's not really explained how that happens because the story is told from his perspective. So it's more like, well, this happened, and now he's trying to figure out what the rules are for him within the world. And he's taken on the form of his character avatar. All the other characters in the game are themselves. So in other words, they all think that they don't have personas or whatever. He's the only one in the game because he was playing the game when it was like, imagine World of Warcraft, and it's the last day of World of Warcraft. They're shutting it down, and there was really no one in there because they're shutting it down because there's really no interest in it anymore. So this one guy was in there, and he's just kind of wandering around the sort of palace that his group has built and all this stuff. And then when the game shut off, he somehow found himself sucked into the game. But he's with all these other NPC type things. I think the best parts of it are that he's trying to figure out how to do things like access menus or do spells, while also not trying to let other characters know what has happened. That he doesn't know what he's doing. Because he's kind of like, it would be dangerous, right? If people knew that I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. So, I mean, it's okay. It's not really my thing. So, I kind of wanted to try a light novel. So I got a couple and figured I'd try this one first. It's very popular. If you like fantasy stuff, if this sounds even remotely like, oh, that might be for me, I would try it. But if it's not, I would probably skip it. There's a lot of just like, here's the how the world works kind of stuff. And, for me, that stuff is boring and I just don't care about it. And it's not. Maybe I should say, I'm going to give a little bit of a hot take here on problem that I often have with fantasy novels. Okay, I'm a big believer in the sort of idea that description of things by a character reveals things about that character. The classic example is like when someone, instead of saying someone is 6 feet tall, a character might say like, I met this guy, he was super tall. He was even taller than my gym coach, who I thought was the tallest person in the world. And you're like, okay, so by the one, it's like we know a guy is 6 feet tall. By the other one, we know that the character who we're hearing from is probably younger, and is, in school, and is probably a little bit afraid of their gym coach. You know what I mean? You learn some little things by letting that character describe someone else in the world. And I think what I feel a lot in fantasy is that, like, I feel that they don't do that very much. They just kind of describe the world and how it functions and stuff like that, but a lot of it feels to me like information dump and stuff like that. It doesn't feel very organic, and I don't feel like I'm learning much about the characters through it. I feel like it's more, they have so much to get out there as far as like, here's how magic works in this world. And in order to do that sort of economically, so I'm not bored out of my fucking mind, because it's like, well, I don't want to read 10 chapters about the magic system. I don't know, it just kind of like it makes it uninteresting for me, because for me, I don't really care about magic systems. I care about what it means for a character of a certain type to be interacting with the world that you've set up. So, like, I'm totally down to read a book that has a magic system, but for me, I think to really enjoy it, I would have to feel like the point of the magic system was to expose something about this character or this type of person or something like that. You know what I mean? It pushes them to a certain limit, or like it tests something about them, or like, because the world functions differently in this way, it kind of reveals something about a character as opposed to, I don't know, wish fulfillment or like whatever the fuck's going on in a lot of these things. So yeah, I just, that's why fantasy for me is usually not that big, because I'm a lot more interested in what people decide to do as opposed to how creatively a world can be structured. It's just not my thing. Okay, then I read a Kentaro Miura memorial manga, which was written by a close friend of his. So he's the guy who wrote and illustrated Berserk, and he died very unexpectedly a couple of years ago. He had like a congenital heart defect that no one knew about, and then he died from it. And then they were like, "Oh, he had this thing." Just a freak thing. And so, it was interesting. Like, they made these very fancy editions Dark Horse published of Berserk, these large format leather bound or leather-ish material bound editions of Berserk. I don't know if anything that's leather bound is actually leather bound. I think like small journals and stuff like that are probably leather, but I don't know that any like major publishers are really doing leather anymore. That seems crazy to me. But anyway, these editions of Berserk that are very fancy, and I think there was 42 or 43, and so Miura died at a certain point in the story. So Berserk is unfinished as of now, and when he died, it was very much unfinished, and they published the last volume that he would have written and illustrated. And it's just slightly slimmer than the other volumes. The other volumes are very uniform in size, and that one is slightly slimmer. And I actually really liked that. I thought it was like a nice... if you saw them all on the shelf lined up, it's like a nice visual tribute, I think. Because even if the series goes on, I think that's I don't know, a nice way to sort of honor or recognize, like, this is where Miura, his part in it ended. So anyway, this was a manga done by his close friend who, I guess what they decided was to continue publication of Berserk. And, there's a lot of questions in the fandom about, like, why, the motives, and it's like, well, because it makes a lot of money or whatever, but, the guy who's basically in charge of it has worked closely with him for many, many years. I mean, like decades. Even before Berserk started, and like knows him really well, and they were like good personal friends. And he has a lot of respect for him. And what he said is that he's like, what we're gonna do is finish the story, because it is like an epic tale that does develop a lot and change a lot, and it seems like, I personally I would love to, just even if it was like just a text document that was like, here's what was going to happen, I would be curious to read that. And so what this guy who has taken it over, when Miura first died, Dark Horse published a statement from him / Dark Horse, the publisher, and it was like, we're gonna think about this. We don't know what's the future of Berserk right now. So, he just died. So we're gonna think about it, talk about it, and, we'll let you know soon. And what they decided was this editor guy was basically, you know what? I'm going to keep publishing it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish the comic and I'm going to do all the things that Miura expressly told me were going to happen. And he's like, I know the overall storyline and I know a lot of the, little other things that were supposed to happen in the book. And he's like, so my plan is to publish it being absolutely faithful to everything that I was told was supposed to happen and not adding anything else. And I like that. I think that's a fair way to do it. Now, whether or not that means the comics will be very good or not, I don't know. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying like they're going to be awesome. But I think it's very reasonable to just be like, I'm going to do the things that I know for sure he intended and not do things other than what I know for sure were intended. And that's where we're going to go. I was like, all right, fair enough. Anyway, this was a manga that was basically about, his time knowing Miura and kind of his legacy and stuff like that. And it was interesting. It was sad because you're like, it's sort of like, for me, well, this is nerdy, but like when a rock star dies and you're sad about it. But then you also know in your head, you're like, I mean, I know there were people who knew this rock star personally who were probably ultra sad about this. You know what I mean? And like, who knew this person as a person, not as a creator of stuff that I liked a lot and connected with. And that's very much how this felt. So I don't know. It was a nice tribute to the man, I thought. And it was like I think it was a good thing for him to put out into the world, because to me it was a little bit like, it wasn't chastising, and it was like, hey, this was like a guy, he was a real human person, and like, here's what he was like as a person. So you just got to know that a little bit. And yeah, I thought that was nice. I guess it also helps that like, it seems like Miura was a generally nice person. He wasn't a bad, evil guy. And so I guess that makes it a little easier too, because I don't know, maybe it's better. Maybe we should be idolizing more manga artists and writers because it's like they're not doing these horrible scandals or whatever. I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe they are, and I just don't know. But maybe they're not. Next was a book called Batman 89, which I was so excited for, and I didn't really enjoy. I thought the premise of Batman 89 was basically to write some comics as though it was like, here's, if comics were written and it was like they were written in the style of and in the time 1989 when the Tim Burton first movie came out, this is what they'd be like. And I was like, yeah, right. That sounds cool. I'm into that. But it kind of, to me, the comic didn't seem to like believe its own premise, because it kind of what ends up happening in the book is like, okay, it's the Michael Keaton Batman. Batman looks like Michael Keaton. But what happens is it's a book that seems to take place in modernish times. So I don't think it takes place in 1989. But also, it deals with a lot of like race and like gentrification kind of stuff and whatever. This is all fine. I'm not saying these are bad things to have in a book. But here's what I'm saying about it. This felt to me like a Batman story you could tell in a modern, current Batman comic. Like, there's nothing preventing this story from happening in a modern, current Batman comic, and I don't know that it benefits in any way from being set in 1980 or being in that universe of the Tim Burton Batman movie. So I felt like it was kind of a wasted opportunity, because I was like, well, what's a story you could tell about the Tim Burton version of Batman in 1994. You know what I mean? Like, what would be unique about that or different? So it's not that I hated that it was like, oh God, woke Batman, fuck this shit. It was more that I was like, well, you, it seemed to me like cynically, like, you know what? There's talk about this Batman right now because Michael Keaton, put on the cape and cowl to be in a Flash movie. So they just sort of were like, let's capitalize on that. And, it worked on me. It certainly suckered me in when I was like, hey, Batman 89, that's kind of cool. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I felt tricked is too strong a word. I don't think it was tricked. Like, I don't feel like it was intentional, but it just felt like they kind of just didn't do anything with it. They had an idea. They were like, what if we set a Batman story in the Tim Burton universe? And then they're like, and it would be exactly the same as a Batman story from today. You know what I mean? Which is maybe the conclusion they came to. But I was like, okay, well, I don't know. I don't need it. I don't need that. I think that's the thing is I was expecting something unique or different, and it was not. So I felt, I could take or leave it. And I think I would have enjoyed it a little more had it just not been sold to me the way it was. I'm always a guy who's like, I'm willing to admit, when I read a book or start in on a book and I don't like it, and then I realize, like, you know what? That's because I picked up something that's not for me. You know what I mean? And like, I maybe didn't look into this as much as I could have, or like, I misread something and this isn't for me. Or like sometimes, you'll see a video or a blog or whatever, and someone talks about a book, and I'm like, I don't think this person accurately represented what this book is supposed to be. The example I use a lot is like when people say Roxane Gay's books are funny, and I'm like, I mean, they have jokes in them, but I don't know if I would call them funny. You know what I mean? Humor's subjective, I guess, but when she's writing a story about being sexually assaulted, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that's one of the first words she would use. Funny is the one that I feel like is most misused in book reviews online, is because I feel like people don't know what to say about a book, and so they're like, oh, it's very funny. And you're like, well, I mean, maybe it makes a good point using a metaphor of some kind that puts a harsh lens on people, but I don't know if that means it's funny. Anyway, I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong in that, and I'm like, I thought it was this, but that's because I'm dumb. But Batman 89 is one that I was like, I thought it was something other than what it was, but I think that's how it was sold to me, so I don't feel like it's my fault. Do feel like I was bamboozled a little. Light bamboozle.
Somebody should. Let's talk about two time. Let's talk about bum one, yeah. Asking the questions that nobody could. Like, where are the bone dogs in?
All right, I'm back in the car. Watching a lady have what I would describe as a either desperate or dangerous, not desperate or desperate or angry struggle with a stroller. It reminds me of things that I do because, like, I'll just get frustrated and I'm like, this goddamn thing never works for me. You know what I mean? I'm trying to think of a good example. They could be trying to adjust your chair in the office and it's like you're thrashing around and angry with it and you're like, this never works when I need it. Which are the things that like really kill my soul. You know what I mean? It's not like the things that really hurt me inside are not the things like, the big life stuff. It's that stuff. But I have learned, I've just gotten to know myself a little bit. And I've learned that for me, what's best in life is to hear the lamentations. Um, what's best for me in life is to, like, if I have a thing like that, and I'm like, every time I get this thing out, it's like this, and I can't figure it out, and da 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 da. I'm like, what the smart thing to do is? It's 2025. Get on the internet, watch a video of someone doing it. There's a great chance there's a video of someone doing it and doing it correctly. And if you're struggling with something like that, there's half a chance that there are other people online who are like, same problem, bro. And it's worth figuring out how to do it correctly. Because then if I figure out how to do it correctly, I'm like, oh, that's much easier. And then I feel like an asshole because I'm like, I've been doing it like this for years. I've done it 100 times this incorrect way. And now that I learned how to do it correctly, I'm like, dummy, why didn't you figure out how to do this, before so that you could just do it easily? And this whole time, you could have been doing it like this, Anyway, back to the book list. Next I have Uncanny by Junji Ito. Junji Ito is the master of Japanese horror manga, and this is his autobiography, I guess, or memoir. I'm not actually, okay, I know the difference between biography and autobiography, right? I've learned enough between being an English major and a librarian to know that one. Autobiography and memoir. Now, here's what I've always kind of taken it to mean. I assume that a memoir is not necessarily comprehensive and covering your entire life, but that instead it's covers a portion of your life or maybe tells a story from your life, but it's not as beholden or obligated, or the expectation isn't necessarily there that you're going to tell everything. But that could be completely wrong. I'm not sure. I also think maybe memoir to me is looser, as far as you can, skip around if you want, or jump around in time or back and forth in time, that kind of stuff. It's not as much a sort of historical document, let's say. So, that's my take on autobiography memoir. So I would call this more of a memoir because it's more focused on basically his career as a horror mangaka as opposed to being his whole life, but he does talk about some things from childhood and some of his career. I'm trying to think if you've seen, there's Japanese Tales of the Macabre or Japanese Horror Tales or something. It's a series on Netflix that took a bunch of his stories and made them into animated shorts. It's kind of like watching Twilight Zone, but anime style. If you've seen that, those are Junji Ito stories. I think he does really great, really weird stories. My personal favorite of his books is one that I think a lot of other people who like him don't like. It's called Soichi. And it's basically about this creepy kid who runs around kind of pretending to be a vampire all the time. And maybe does have magic powers and maybe doesn't. It's not totally clear. But he's basically just a little creep who, annoys the shit out of everybody, including his family, who is 100% normal. And he's this weird creep vampire paranormal kid who likes to put nails in his mouth and spit them at people. Or there was a story where it was his older brother's trying to study for exams, and he's got a very regular study regimen, and he's very annoyed because Soichi's constantly making noise and bothering him. So they actually build him a room within a room, because that deadens the sound. And then that's not quite enough, so they build a smaller room within that room and basically end up building him this very claustrophobic It's enough space for him to sit on the floor hunched over, and there's a desk, and that's basically it. But then Soichi takes advantage of this situation and starts screwing around by getting into the rooms between the rooms and, annoying his brother that way. It's basically like, what if a little kid had some sort of black magic powers, kind of, but then was also just being a little dickhead about it? And I find it very funny. And also it's like, got a little bit of that dark macabre aspect to it. I think other people don't like it. My guess is because tonally it's weird, right? It's kind of a comedy thing and it's kind of a dark thing. Sometimes he seems to have like powers and sometimes he doesn't. But overall I find it very charming and fun. But I also like the horror books a lot. Junji Ito, so he talks a little bit about the things that kind of scared him as a kid and inspired him as an artist. And then he also talks his career before he was a manga guy was as a dental technician. And he worked at a lab where, I don't know if you call it a lab, but basically where people would, dentists would take scans and stuff. And if you needed a crown or a fake tooth implant or whatever, and they made those kinds of things. And so, they had to sculpt them. And it was kind of artistic. He was talking about how, he was in like dental school or whatever, technician school, and there were things that he was good and not good at. But they did the day where they had to like mold a tooth based on, you would look at a tooth and then try and create a mold of it or a version of it that would be a good substitute. And he was like really good at it. But he also was like not that fast at it. He was like, sometimes the place I worked at, we would get overwhelmed. So we had to hire a temp or like a contractor. And he's like, we had this guy who came in one time and he was like hired gun in the dental world. And he would do like 10 fillings at a time. He would just come in and he'd line up like 10 things and he'd heat the amalgam and he'd just do them all at once. And, Junji Ito's watching this and is like, that's crazy. Like, that's never going to work. You're going to screw it up. And he did it good. And he was just like, oh my God, like this guy is so good at this. It's funny to think about being good at something like that because you're like, yeah, I mean, I guess there are people who are like good at that stuff, who have a talent that you're like, it has no real application other than the exact thing, but it's still impressive, right? I would be impressed, I guess. Anyway, he talks a little bit about that stuff and then gets into a lot of like what how he comes up with ideas and stuff. And I mean, it is a lot of like I had a dream and this is what came out of it and stuff like that. I mean, he's kind of all over the place and he has a lot of ideas and some of them work great and some of them not as great. And he's an interesting artist. I want to say this about the book, however. So, this originally came out in Japanese and was translated into English. And the English version of it has a very plain cover with just font, and it's like Junji Ito Uncanny on the front. And it's like, I think it's the Albertus, the John Carpenter font, I believe. And it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But he's a master manga artist. So you look at the Japanese version and he did like this awesome art piece with all of these, characters from his different works and stuff like that. It's great. And they're like, I don't know, coming out of his head or something like that. It's awesome. And you're like, this is crazy. This would be like, I'm trying to think of an American sort of equivalent that everybody would know. Like, it'd be like if you had Maurice Sendak wrote a memoir and you just had plain text cover. you'd be like, that's insane. You know what I mean? No one would do that. Like, whoever did that is a monster. And I'm like, why? And also, I'm like, why the fuck? Why is the English version like that? Like, why wouldn't you give us the same cover? You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like there would be that big a barrier to giving us the same cover. You know what I mean? There wasn't that much text on it or anything. I don't know. It seems very doable to me. Just not, I don't know. It feels to me like somebody fucked up and fucked us over in America. Somebody was like, these Americans don't deserve a good cover. And I'm like, I don't know that we deserve it, but I would like it. And I want to point out to anyone who's listening, just like how annoyed I am by that. The next thing I read is Quick Stops Volume 2 by Kevin Smith. So this is kind of a comic book series that, expands on his View Askew universe. So it includes the characters from his movies and so on, which is actually a thing he did way back in the day. And it was kind of like View Askew universe. Kevin Smith's created universe was one of the first sort of what I would call cinematic universes that I was aware of. And it's interesting because, like now we've gotten a lot more of those with like Marvel and stuff like that, especially Marvel. And those are like such huge capital P products and so on. Whereas this is like, just like one guy basically and made all his movies and was like, you know what? Why not just make them all be connected? And you're like, yeah, I mean, I guess, none of these are stories these all are stories that happen in essentially the real world, maybe a little stretched here and there. So why not put it in the same world? And then they did some comics probably in like the late 90s, which I kind of think started because, I mean, he was a comic book fan, comic book guy. And so, I feel like maybe someone was like, hey, do you want to make some comics of Clerks or whatever? And he's like, fuck yeah, why not? You know what I mean? Of course I want to make comics. And he did. I would say, so Quick Stops is like a newer series, I guess you'd call it, of expanded stories from the Askewniverse. And I don't love them. I don't know. I think they just, for me, aren't doing anything that I need. But I'm a big Kevin Smith stan. I think the world, at least for a while, turned on him a bit. Or maybe has turned on him a couple times based on a couple of the movies he's made and so on. And, I think he's been unfairly maligned just because, I don't know, I'm like, all right, so he made some movies you didn't like. Let's even just say, he's made movies that are not good, objectively just not good. Is that such a crime? You know what I mean? People talk about Kevin Smith like he's a war criminal because he made movies they didn't like. You know what I mean? And also, let's talk about this. He's made movies they didn't like while also making several movies they really liked. Or, even just one movie they really liked. And then they talk about him like he's, Himmler because he then also made some movies people don't like. And I'm like, that's crazy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's okay to be disappointed, right? In a creator you like, and then they come out with something and you're like, it wasn't that good. But I don't know. I'm very much of the team of like, the people I like, the Kevin Smiths, the Chuck Palahniuks, the whatever. I'm like, I'm not saying they can do no wrong. I'm not saying that everything they touch is gold. I'm just saying that, like, for me, everything they do, I'm fine with. I'm just like, whatever. You know what I mean? I think if you make, I don't know, I would say he's made like probably 3 to 4 movies that I would call very formative for me. I think you do that and it's like, you know what? You could do whatever the fuck you want after that. Not a crime. You know what I mean? He can't do Me Too shit, and he's not. But it's like, after doing that kind of stuff, you know what I mean? The amount of joy I got out of Mallrats as a young man, I feel like justifies quite a bit of, him fucking around. Of him just doing like whatever he wants. Of him, if he wants to do swing and a miss movies for the rest of his life, if he wants to make comics that I don't really enjoy, I think that's fine. I think it's fine. You know what I mean? I guess I just feel like, I don't know, or like a band, and people are like, "Ooh, this album sucks," or whatever, "This band lost it," or whatever. And I'm kind of like, you know what, man? I would dream of making like one album that people fucking love. And it's like, if lightning struck the one time and never again, I'd be like, well, c'est la vie. There's a truck here that has a bumper sticker that says, Firefighter Grandpa. Does that mean that his grandson or granddaughter or grandchild is a firefighter? Or does that mean this is an old man who's a firefighter? I would prefer that it means they have a grandchild who's a firefighter, because I don't really want grandpa coming to, you know what I mean? I mean, maybe you could have like the grandpa squadron, and that's who they call when it's like, well, nothing, no one's going to need to be carried out of a house here. This is not like a speedy emergency situation. This is just kind of a little thing that happened. We're fine. We'll be fine. We need grandpa to come with the big firefighter glove, because our propane tank is like shooting fire out. But he just needs to turn it off. There's a car up here that is like waiting till the last moment to merge, even though it's not going to be able to get in front of anyone else. And there's a huge space for it to merge into. And what it elected to do was merge like 5 feet from the car in front of it. This is crazy. People are crazy. Like, what do people think when they're driving? They're just like, whatever. Like, I don't know. It's worth it to them? Is that worth it to you? Like, what did you gain from that? Okay. Next, I have a manga series called Cat Plus Gamer. This is about a young woman who is a big gamer and gets a cat and doesn't really know how to like have a cat or be a cat owner. And then so decides to sort of apply her gaming knowledge to raising a cat. You know what I mean? And like thinking about the way her cat interacts with the world the way you would think about a video game. So like the cat learns something new and she thinks of it as like the cat has leveled up and learned a new skill. You know what I mean? The cat has HP, like something happens to it. It's sick, so it's, HP is kind of low or something like that. It's insanely cute. I don't know how to, I don't know why I like it, because it doesn't seem like something I would like. It's just very cute. It's very like cozy is probably a word a lot of people would use to describe it, and I think is very apt. This is my version of an elderly woman and her plucky cat solve mysteries in the English countryside. You know what I mean? And it's like a murder, but not like a horrible murder where it's like, and then he had sex with her with a knife dildo. You know what I mean? It's just like, ooh, he's poisoned her tea or whatever the fuck they do in those books. I don't actually know how it works, but I imagine the murders are fairly bloodless. And I may be wrong, because maybe this is like, oh my God. Somebody was driving really fast up the shoulder and almost plowed right into the back of a piece of construction equipment. That was crazy. I regret like saying as much as I did about the previous person being crazy, which they're still being very crazy. They're really riding the ass of the person in front of them for no reason that I can comprehend. But this was even worse. I guess you see crazy driving, You're like, wow, that was the craziest thing I've ever seen. And you're like, the way to be sure that you're going to see something crazier is to make that declaration. Anyway, it's super cute. I can't, I can't talk myself out of like, I don't know, this is like a super softy book that's just adorable and has warm fuzzies and, is kind of a junk food book for me and whatever. That's what it is. You know, I think this is maybe the book for me that's like the most challenged my perception of like when I was in my early 20s, I was a very serious reader. And I didn't read like classics and stuff, but I probably only read things that would fall in the category of literary fiction. Um, and as I've aged, I've gotten out of that some. I mean, I probably still prefer, it's like high-low, the things I like the most are either literary fiction or, Gantz. But I don't know. I've tried to expand my horizons a bit, even though I don't really like that terminology because I'm just like, whatever. It's just like such a cliche idea, I guess. But I don't look down on anyone for reading things that I personally that are junk for me. Let me put it that way. It's like I think I try to think of books now that are like junk food as like, well, for me it's junk food, but for somebody else it's not. You know what I mean? Or they like it. They like junk food more than I do. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? Hey, there's nothing wrong with somebody eating an entire bag of crazy bread in the car on the way home from work. Nothing wrong with it. Maybe I wouldn't like it. Maybe for me, I'd be like, my tummy is going to turn inside out and kill me. But, hey, it's a very live and let live kind of situation, if you ask me. All right, next we have Rooster Fighter. This is a really weird manga about a superpowered rooster that keeps saving the world. I sort of enjoyed it. I mean, it's incredibly silly and dumb, and that's what I liked about it. There are a lot of manga that I think fit into that category of like they're very silly and very dumb, and that's their charm. Trying to think of One Punch Man is one I've read that's like that. One Punch Man, here's what sold me on it. Basically, a bunch of aliens or monsters show up now and then. And One Punch Man is a superhero who fights them. And, everyone's like, One Punch Man, how did you get so powerful? I want to train to be as powerful as you. And he'll be like, all right, I'll share with you my training regimen. But, it's not for everyone. It's incredibly rigorous. And then he's like, I would do 10 push-ups a day. I jogged a mile every day. And, I did like 10 minutes of meditation. So, again, not for everyone. Manage your own expectations of yourself, but whatever. I don't know, there's something very funny about it. Because it's just like, he barely did anything. Like, he's not even doing what maybe an average gym goer would do. And yet, it made him like the strongest guy in the world. Anyway, it's silly. I don't know if I could, it's one of those books that I'm like, it's silly and fun, and at the same time, sometimes I'm like, is my life infinite? You know what I mean? I think my life is more finite than maybe reading all of Rooster Fighter. But worth reading one of Rooster Fighter. Next is a book called If You Find This, I'm Already Dead by Matt Kindt, Kindt. I really like a lot of Matt Kindt's books, and not this one. This one's about kind of science finds like a portal to another dimension or something. And this lady goes there, and I don't know, they find out that there's bad stuff happening. Like, it's a little bit political. It's a little bit... I think it's mostly a little bit political, and I just wasn't interested in it. It had that vibe of like government evil, government bad. Government will want to, if we found an alien race or something, we would exploit it and take their resources. I'm not saying that that's not true. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that that's completely, that doesn't sound like something we would do to an alien or like a brown person in North Africa. But I think for me, it's just kind of a story that I feel I'm not interested in the story because it's like, well, just rich people wanting to get richer is not a story that I'm very interested in. And it's not because I am offended by it or find it to be untrue. It's just, to me, like, that motivation's not fun to read about. I don't know. I have a hard time describing it because I'm like, I'm not saying it's like untrue or something. I think I'm saying like, it's just for me and I don't care. I don't care about it. It's not compelling to read about a man who's like, I want to be rich. You're like, okay. I mean, yeah, I think that's a lot of people. I think a lot of people operate that way, but I just don't care about it. It doesn't bring much to the table for me. So I think that one fell a little flat. I mean, I guess also sometimes I feel like when I say a comic is political, sometimes you'll see like a stand-up, right? And they're doing political material, but it's jokes. And then sometimes you'll see a stand-up that's doing political material, and they're just kind of saying true things. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I don't know. So it doesn't make me laugh, really, either. It's just kind of there. Okay, the next is a book called The Night Never Ends, which is kind of like a weird slasher graphic novel. And you know what? I'm going to tell you, like, the first third of it, I fucking hated it. Because it had like a tonal problem for me. It had this problem for me that horror movies have. I'll give you the example of the movie Midsummer, which is like a bunch of college kids go to this weird culty enclave in somewhere like a Scandinavian culty enclave. And basically are hanging out there, and they're like going to write a thesis about it or something. And then, they watch this like old guy jumps off a cliff because he's old. And I guess that's what they do. It's a little Logan's Run or something, a non-technological Logan's Run. And then he's not dead, so then this guy like hits him in the head with a fucking sledgehammer and smashes his skull, and it's like gory and gross and whatever. And it's like then the kids are talking about, writing their thesis about this stuff. And they're arguing over like, no, I'm writing my thesis about it. No, I'm doing my thesis about it. And I'm like, I can't care about who's writing their thesis about this and like that argument after I just watched what I just watched. And I just watched it in a movie. You're actually there. And it didn't feel like it was trying to be like, these kids are so callous or something. It just felt like it was like trying to make me care about a thing. And I was like, no, we've gone beyond that. Or, it's like when, I don't know, in a Freddy movie, and it's like 3 of my 4 friends are now dead. I know what's happening with this Freddy Krueger thing. And it's like, well, I guess I'll just go to school. And you're like, why are you going to school? I'm like, fuck that shit. So that's kind of how The Night Never Ends starts for me. But actually, it gets pretty fun. And so I think if you go into it prepared for that, if you're like ready for a story that it's got kind of a comedic tone to the slasher thing. It's like an early Kevin Smith movie if he had written a slasher early on. And so there was like the slasher stuff is kind of more just like the scaffolding for a hangout. And like they can talk about things. If you kind of go in with that, I think it's a good experience. And ultimately, I did actually like it quite a bit. And, it did make me feel old. They use a lot of like Zoomer slang and stuff like that. And I was just like, oh my God. these haircuts and whatever. But ultimately, I was like, you know what? You won me over. And I was like, not easy to do. I mean, easy to do for a book. Like, I go into a book wanting to like it, but not always the simplest task. But it did it, so I want to give it that credit and recommend it on that basis.
And nobody could. Like, where are the bone thugs and are they in harmony? You're a helpful snowman.
All right. Next on the list is Dragon Ball / Dragon Ball Z. I read the whole thing. Well, I haven't read the whole Dragon Ball saga, I guess, because there's like Dragon Ball GT and Dragon Ball Super or something, but I felt like I read those two, and for me, there's something to be said for you as an individual deciding when a series is over. You know what I mean? It got to a good ending place. And I was like, okay, yeah, this like kind of puts us in a spot where it's like you don't have to read anymore, right? You wouldn't have to, you wouldn't be at a cliffhanger point or anything like that. You kind of know what happened to everybody, what everyone's doing. So, that's like all good. And I liked it. It's fun, and like, so earlier I was talking about how, God damn it, who designed this? Like, come out, and it's like, depending on what exit you leave this parking lot, you can or cannot turn left, and it has nothing to do with like safety or anything. You know what I mean? I'm like, I get it. Sometimes there's a spot where it's like, you shouldn't be able to turn left here. Like, there's a bad idea, and it doesn't let you, and that's probably for the best. But sometimes it's just luck of the draw. You know what I mean? You just have to know. I guess it's like a thing. It's like maybe it makes you feel good about living in that city. Like, I know that if I exit this parking lot of this donut store on this side, that it'll cost me 20 minutes of my life. Because I dared to make that attempt. I was so fucking stupid. I thought I could just casually leave a parking lot without even thinking about it. Anyway, I was talking earlier in the previous episode about how there's a thing I like about manga that I was going to get to, and this is it. Manga has a character type that I don't know that we see a lot in like American stuff. And the character type is like the incredibly optimistic, superpowered character. Optimistic to a fault, maybe a little bit dopey, a little bit like of a, well, shucks, kind of a bumpkin. I don't know. And like, that's the appeal of that book, big time. It's so appealing because it's like, that's the character. That is the character that you see throughout. And it's amazing. It's such a pleasant world and character to spend time with. Goku is the main character. And like, he's just such a pleasant person to spend time with. And he's like nice and is having a good time most of the time. And he's confident, but also isn't a dick about it at all. He's just a nice guy. And so it's like, it's fun. It's a fun world to be in. Some books you read or some video games you play and you're like, well, this isn't a pleasant place to be. And it's by design, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, it sucks. That's kind of the idea. And some things are like, not intentionally supposed to be unpleasant, but you're just not having fun with it. And Dragon Ball is one that I was like, this is the world I want to live in. Next, I read a manga called Okinawa, which is a history of Okinawa, and it was pretty interesting. A lot of it was about World War II, like pre-World War II, during World War II, and after World War II, and it's been a difficult place to live. I don't know. It's given me a lot of We'll just go deep for a minute. I have a very strong feeling that uh, war is like just it exploits everyone, except for maybe a very small number of people who get you know money usually out of it. Um, but like I don't know. I've read part of a memoir that was written by a guy who was like I think Belgian and was conscripted into the German army in World War II. And like this was showed some Japanese people who were in Okinawa who were, in the Japanese army in World War II. And like uh it seems like most people are not having a good time. You know what I mean? And most people are not doing by being in these armies, they're not doing activities they would like to do. I mean, they are fucking miserable. Um and they hate it, and they're like constantly trying to be like, oh, could we do something differently? And then the person in charge is like, no, and also I'm gonna fucking kill you for even suggesting it, it's shit like that. And you're just like, this sucks. I know this is not, I was like, I'm gonna go real deep and be like, war is bad, but I just like, I don't know, maybe in my old age I've like grown to have sympathy for people on all sides of conflicts like that, because I think those conflicts are like bigger than the people involved in them. And everyone just kind of gets swept up. But like, it's cosmically unfair, right? Because it's like, okay, because you happen to be born at this place at this time, you're going to get swept up in a war that really has nothing to do with you. And your life will be much, much shorter because you get killed in this war, and that's it. That's all you get. And yours is shortened for no real reason. You know what I mean? We don't even remember. It's like, and it's just so dumb. It's so fucking dumb. And I feel like my reaction to reading Okinawa was like, presidents and leaders of countries should have to read like a war memoir like every 6 months or something. You know what I mean? They should have to take a day and just read an entire book that's written by someone who was in a war and just be like, okay, yeah, this is bad. Like, we should avoid this, right? We should not do wars if we can possibly avoid it. And if we can make a war stop, a war that's currently happening, if we could do something to stop that war, we should probably do that. You know what I mean? We should probably make a pretty big effort and not just be like, oh, well. I just like the people who have the power to do that. I really wish would spend more time thinking about it and just sort of being like, listen, every day that this goes on, lives are lost that they don't come back. It's not like the war, we sign a peace treaty and everyone's happy about it, but it's not like the dead people come back. You know what I mean? They're gone. They're dead. They're gone. They don't get anything. And like so many of them are just so pointless. You know what I mean? It's not all like, I mean, I get it. And I think it's a horrific and loss of life and all this stuff. And you're like, yeah, I guess. But, like people storming the beach at Normandy, and it's like, well, they had to do it. You know what I mean? They had to. I don't know what other choice they had. And, I guess at least, I don't know if there's any comfort in those moments of dying. I kind of doubt it in my cynical old age. I don't know if there's any comfort in the like, I was trying to do the right thing and help other people and trying to do a good thing. But I don't know. I don't know if that would be any comfort to me as I died. If it was like, I could have just, I don't know. If I just had flat feet, I could just be at home living my normal life instead of doing this and dying so that, I don't know, other things can happen that I will never experience because I'm dying. It sucks. That sucks. Next is My Hero Academia. I have very little to say about the book itself. It's fine. It's a manga. It's kind of like an X-Men crossed with an Avengers, I guess, where it's like kids get superpowers at some point in their life and then they go to superhero school. And this kid who didn't have superpowers does, and then whatever. It's kind of coming at it from an outsider perspective. Here's what I find interesting about it. I've gathered something interesting about manga, and maybe something I don't like, or that I do like about it, is that like there are manga that I like and, a couple that I really like, but I'm not involved in the fandom of those things in any way. You know what I mean? I don't go on like subreddits about them and stuff like that. And I think that's good. I think that's a better way to live because, okay, what I've gathered is like fandom of My Hero Academia is like weirdly toxic or something, or it has a reputation for that, right? I've gathered that Berserk, the fans of that have a bad reputation in terms of shitting on basically everything that's not Berserk. Stuff like that. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, maybe that's true. I have no fucking idea. And I don't care. Like, I just don't have a horse in the race. And yeah, so I've seen it more than once, people are like, what do you think's the worst fandom in manga? And people are like, My Hero Academia. And I'm like, okay, maybe. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I have no idea. And I don't care. You know what I mean? I really don't care. Because it's fine. I'm not a part of it. I don't know that I've actively chosen to not be a part of it, but I'm definitely not a part of the fandom. And the toxicity of the fandom is something that if it's happening completely without my knowledge. And I guess I just prefer it that way. I don't know. I don't know that I'm a part of any fandom that's big enough to be toxic or not or what have you. I don't know very much about these things. But it's kind of awesome. It's kind of what being like an outsider who enjoys manga as opposed to like a huge fan of specific things or a huge manga fan per se. It's awesome because I'm like, well, I kind of just get to dip in and enjoy the things and then be gone. I guess comic book fandom, right? That's probably the most toxic fandom that I could be said to be a part of. And yeah, it's just like, to me, I just don't really care. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of assholes in comic book fandom. And, but also I'm like, I'm not doing anything to change that because I just don't really know what that would even be, I guess. And for me, it's not like I'm going to try and make, I don't know, Star Wars fandom be less toxic because I'm like, yeah, I don't really care. And, my advice to people wouldn't be like, it's not toxic, it's fine, and you guys ruined it. My advice is just like, yeah, I mean, just maybe don't engage with that part of it. If you don't like the way people talk about the new Star Wars online or whatever, just don't talk about it online. You know what I mean? Watch the movies, watch the shows, go to the theme parks, and just, call it a life. You don't have to engage with those sorts of things. You know what? I just realized, I know what the most toxic fandom that I've seen is I listen to a podcast, Tell 'em Steve Dave, a lot. And like, the subreddit is so bad. And when I say it's toxic in the way of like, it's baffling that the people who post on it listen to the show because it seems like they really dislike it. I would say hate it. And like, they have no good things to say about it. They have a lot of bad things to say about it. And they just kind of seem to shit on it a lot. And some of the people who are on there just seem to have like a personal vendetta. There's a guy who so dislikes one of the three hosts of the show that I'm suspicious that it's like, is he married to your ex or something? You know what I mean? It feels personal to me. Because it's just like no matter what someone's talking about, he'll turn it to, yeah, well, that's nothing compared to what this guy did. And I just find it odd because it's like, and that's the decision I made was I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to engage with it. It also sucks because when you go there, if someone says something super negative and you're just like, bro, like, you don't have to listen to this show, right? This isn't like assigned to you in a class or something. The refrain is always like, hey man, I have a right to free speech, or like, oh, you want everyone on this sub to just constantly suck this show's dick or whatever. And I'm like, not really. I mean, look, there's a difference between dating someone that you want to constantly be blowing you and dating someone who you're like, every time we talk, you're saying something mean or negative to or about me. Like, what do you like about? Do you like anything about me? I mean, it doesn't seem like you like me very much. You know what I mean? If you talked about a person the way you talk about this podcast, I'd be like, everyone in your life would say, regardless of whether or not, let's kill the argument of whether or not the person is good. Let's talk about why you're together with them. Because, like, it doesn't seem like you like them. So maybe your life would be better if you just cut off this relationship. I don't know. Just a thought, right? But anyway, so that's the only thing I had to say about My Hero Academia. Next is a book called The Art of Noticing, which is a book of like, it's kind of like little games you could play, I guess. It's, one of the ones I remember is like you can play a game of trying to see numbers in the wild. So like, let's say you're going to the airport and it's fucking boring, or you're like on a road trip and you're like, all right, I'll start with the number 1 and I have to see the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And so where, at first it's easy, right? But then you get into like, oh, I have to see the number 35. And that's a little harder. And then you get to like 212 and you're like, well, I have to see the number 212. It gets more and more difficult. And you could play this over as long a period as you wanted. But I guess the idea is it's like ways to sort of be in the world and pay attention to things instead of just sort of never paying attention to things. So it's like, I don't know, taking pictures or doing this or doing that. It's okay. It's a little bit, I don't know that the intention of the book was bad, but it's kind of just a lot of things cobbled together that other people have suggested. I will say this. I have a major criticism of the book, which is it's set up so, there's like 100 and some things, ways to notice more, be in the moment more. And throughout the book, the text is broken up by these like quotes and other little things that are in red text. And they're kind of placed randomly on the page or sometimes in between blocks of text. And I'm like, it's funny to me that a book that's more about like be in the moment and like be comfortable being a little bored sometimes and all that stuff. And it's like constantly distracting me with more text, that distracts or takes away from the core text. And I'm like, it's kind of funny. It's like the book is violating its own premise a little bit. I don't know whose decision that was. Like, I could see that being a decision made by the publisher. And maybe the guy who wrote it, Rob Walker, was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. You know what I mean? Like, how could you make my book like this? But they're like, it's too boring otherwise. You're like, yeah, I mean, that's okay. That's kind of the point. And they're like, yeah, the point for me is to sell books. So, fuck you. Next is a book called The Crazy Food Truck. Another manga. It's about a food truck that exists in a post-apocalyptic world and is sort of bringing food to people, and also, the guy who owns and operates the food truck has a crazy dark past, and comes across this young woman who doesn't remember her past. A man with a past, a woman with no past, which is more dangerous. It's mostly goofy and fun, kind of silly, kind of like just a little romp. You know what I mean? Um, yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about it. It's like post-apocalyptic, which I've, eh, you know, soured on to some extent. But this one's post-apocalyptic, but in a more interesting way, I suppose. There's not much focus on, like, how did this apocalypse happen? Can we reverse it? And stuff like that. And it's not like a miserable scrape life together kind of thing. It's like, well, I don't know. He has a food truck, and for some reason, he just has food sometimes. And you're like, it's fine. You know what I mean? It's okay. It's kind of silly. And a good time was had by all. And by all, I mean me. It's also a series that's like a limited series that's, I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 5 volumes. So it's not like a lifelong commitment. You're not going to have to read 800 volumes to get the whole story. So even if you don't love it, you're like, I don't know, I'm 2 hours into this and I'm done with it. It's like watching a shitty movie if you don't like it. I'm a big fan of the manga series that is limited or is finished. So I can be like, well, one way or another, I'm going to get to the end. Next is a book called How to Make the Best Coffee at Home by James Hoffman. James Hoffman is a guy that I found on YouTube who I first watched a video that he did that was explaining how decaf coffee works, how it's made. And basically it's like, well, it's grown a little bit differently because apparently caffeine is something that's in the coffee fruit because insects don't like it. So it's the tree's way of preventing the insects from eating the fruit is to have caffeine in it. Because I guess insects don't like drugs. And we are like, yes, let's do drugs. Because I think that's also how sort of like peyote and stuff like that exists, right? Because it's like animals are like, I tried to eat this thing and I felt fucked up. Never again. And humans are like, I would like to do this every Friday. How can I forget my life every Friday? It's like, I guess maybe animals are like, I don't want to forget my life. I mean, I guess if you're an animal, to be fair to animals, which I don't know why that's something I feel like I need to do. To be fair to animals, it's like, well, if you forget me as Pete, the human, forgetting my life for a couple hours, not really a problem. You know what I mean? I can just sit on the couch and watch Netflix. I can watch Junji Ito's Tales of the Japanese Macabre, or whatever the fuck that's called, for a couple hours, and that's fine. You know what I mean? That's an okay thing to do. Whereas, I guess if I was an animal, and I was like, I forgot about my life for a couple hours, it was like, I was nearly killed 100 times, or like, I barely survived. I was in the middle of the desert, trying to figure out where the fuck my burrow was. Couldn't find it because everything was upside down and smelled wrong. And like my brain didn't work. And I'm extremely lucky to have survived. So I will never do that again. And if any of my fellow animals ask me about this plant, I will be like, don't do it. It would be a huge mistake to do that. So anyway, that's how caffeine happens. And so if they grow coffee in an environment that has fewer insects, the coffee will have less caffeine because it doesn't need it to fend off insects. I believe this is the way it works. You should probably watch this video. I'm sure he would explain it better and also maybe explain it completely differently because I'm dumb. So anyway, I watched a couple videos he did and decided to read his book because I was like, I don't know, I drink this coffee. I drink this brown sludge on a daily basis. I'm interested to know, why not learn a little bit about it? You know what I mean? Something that's in my life every day, why not learn a little something about it? So then I can annoy other people with, did you know that this is how decaf coffee happens? And everyone's like, I don't care about that. That's why I didn't read James Hoffman's How to Make the Best Coffee at Home. But, I also thought it would be interesting because I was like, I mean, I would, I'll give it a try. If he's like, you're doing it wrong, I'm like, I'll try a different way. Here's what I really like about him and the book. Okay, the book is super technical in places, and it kind of warns you about that. But at the same time, I find James Hoffman to be a very realistic person when it comes to coffee. So for one thing, he teaches you how to do, he's like, here's how you can do a tasting at home and set it up for yourself. And he's like, it's pretty simple. Just get however many you want, 3 to 5 different coffees. And he's like, I even recommend just getting one basic shitty coffee. You know what I mean? Just get a Folgers, whatever. And he's like, and you just make them all at the same time, and you kind of taste them back to back, drink some water in between, and then just think about what they taste like and whether you like them or not. And he was talking about, he's like, you see things on a bag and it says chocolatey or whatever. And he's like, but that doesn't really mean it tastes like chocolate. What that means is the person who decides which things to put on the bag, that's what the flavors remind them of in some way. But it doesn't necessarily mean it tastes like you're drinking a hot cocoa, right? And he's like, so you don't really need to worry about those words. And he's like, the thing you really want to do is taste the coffees and find the ones you like and see if there are words in common. Because he's like, okay, if you taste a lot and then they're like, it has a caramel flavor, then it's like, well, you like coffees that maybe don't taste like caramel, but that people who taste coffee and put the labels on bags describe as caramelly. And I was like, that's an extremely practical way to do this and practical advice. I like that a lot. He also is like, I'm not here to tell you that this kind of coffee is good or bad. And as far as he really goes with that most times is he'll talk about what he likes and what he doesn't like and why. But he doesn't really say this sort of thing is bad or this sort of thing is good. I think the most common thing is he's like, if you can find an ethically sourced coffee that comes from a coffee farm that has good practices, that's better. That's just better for the world. So, try and do that. It's very unpretentious, and that's what I like about it, because I think coffee, especially when you get into fanciness, is very pretentious. And I think he's awesome at, when you see him, he comes up, he looks to me like a pretentious guy, and he's got an English accent. So you're like, okay, Mr. Fancy Pants over here. And, he looks like a fancy guy, but he's really, I think, good at balancing and saying, hey, fanciness doesn't necessarily mean good. I think what really sold me on the book overall was I read the section on espresso, even though I have no interest or desire to get into that. And the opening to that section, he's basically like, here's the deal. I put the espresso section at the end of the book because I think espresso is if you like drinking espresso, go to a coffee shop and drink espresso and enjoy it. If you enjoy drinking espresso, but you don't want a new hobby, don't get into making espresso. That's not a good thing to do. Because he's like, it takes a lot of time. It takes money. It's a whole thing. And he's like, and not in a cute way where he's like, ooh, you'll spend all your time and all your money, you won't see your family for 3 weeks because you'll get so involved in espresso. He's saying just be practical about it. He's like, realize whether what you like is drinking it or if you like the process of trying to make it. Because if you like the process, go for it. But if you just like drinking it, it's like, well, if you just like eating pizza, maybe you should get a pizza oven and like try and make pizza. But maybe you should just spend the same time and money eating different pizza. You know what I mean? Hand staple a little journal for yourself in which you keep track of the pizzas you eat and what you liked about them and so on. Maybe put a little spot for an instant photo of each of the pizzas you eat. You know what I mean? Start a pizza club. Pizza Appreciation Club. Anyway, it's a good book. I enjoyed it. Lots of information. And the presentation of it is also very pretentious. It's beautifully Pinterestly Chip and Joanna Gaines photographed. Lots of, living rooms that no one lives in and kitchens that no one cooks in, but like, it's fine. It also seemed like the paying attention book, the art of noticing book, maybe a little miscommunication there. Next was a comic called The Moon is Following Us Down, or The Moon is Following Us or something, by Daniel Warren Johnson. Daniel Warren Johnson is a comic book artist and writer who a lot of people seem to really like. He did a wrestling comic. He did one Wonder Woman, a post-apocalyptic Wonder Woman book, which was kind of the opposite of the crazy food truck in terms of like, it is kind of all about figuring out how did this apocalypse happen, and like, maybe I as one person can reverse it, and all that shit. But also I didn't like it. It did nothing for me. And I read a Transformers book he did that I thought was fine. There was like one good part in it, and it's like Optimus Prime accidentally crushes a deer because he's a giant robot and didn't realize, and then steps on it, and then it's dead. And then he's like, I didn't realize that like Earth creatures were so fragile. You know what I mean? Like, it's so easy to kill them without even realizing it. And that was the best part, and the rest of it I thought was just like whatever. Normal stuff. I don't know, it seems like a lot of people really like Daniel Warren Johnson books. I don't. I read this one without knowing it was his book. I probably wouldn't have read it if I had realized it was his book, just because I haven't been a big fan, and I'm like, why read books that by creators that I'm not really into, you know what I mean? Because it's like, I don't want to just shit on them, and it's like, I don't know, a lot of people enjoy them, but it's like a weird story about, here's the other thing I didn't like about it. It's about like, these parents have a child, and the child is stuck in some sort of magical dream. And so she's like in the real world, is like on life support and stuff, and then is in the dream world, and they're trying to like rescue her from an evil wizard or something. And there's like dream logic happening and other stuff, and it's a little bit too about, I guess, a conflict between the parents of them talking about like, oh, I would sacrifice anything for our child, and the other one is like, me too, but in a different way. And I think for me, one of the motivations that I'm not interested, I was talking about how money isn't like an interesting motivation to me in a story. A guy like absconding with a briefcase full of money, I'm like, I don't know. If that's like the crux of your plot, I'm really not that interested in it. And another one I'm not interested in is like, how far would a parent go for their child? Because I'm like, I don't know. Like, you make it their child that they're trying to rescue from this perpetual dream trap state. And you're like, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of parents would be like, sure, I would kill like a dream demon for that. You know what I mean? I would risk my life to save theirs. And you're like, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of I think it's an easy motivation to put on a character. And like, it's just not interesting to me. You know what I mean? Far more interesting to me would be like it's her best friend. You know what I mean? It's this adult woman's best friend who's another adult woman. And, she's like going really far to try and rescue. And her husband is like, I don't know if I'm willing to give up my life for your best friend. And she's like, that kind of creates a problem in our relationship because while I sort of understand that, I'm willing to give up my life for my best friend. And, she would do the same thing for me. And like, I don't, you know what I mean? That creates such an interesting dynamic. But that kind of thing never happens. It's never explored. Trapped in the dream world is, my brother, not Pete's brother, but a fictional brother who it's like, we have a complicated relationship. It's my dad who actually we have kind of a bad relationship, but also he did a lot for me when I was a kid, and maybe it's complicated because I know he did his best. Also, he's, in his 60s, and it's like, well, me dying in my 40s to save my dad in his 60s is not exactly a perfect trade-off. You know what I mean? Like, having it be a child and having it be these people's child is like, it's just so easy. You know what I mean? You don't have to explain it. You don't have to get into it. And it just, I don't know. For me, that's like a very flat motivation. It's very like, whatever. There's not even a complication. Like, why not they have another kid who's not trapped in a dream? And, the conflict could be about, hey, what about our kid who's alive? You know what I mean? Like, you haven't spent any time with our son because you've been spending all your time in your daughter's dream world trying to rescue her. Meanwhile, our son, while not like in immediate death type crisis, is growing up without a mom and feeling like he doesn't matter to his mom. And like that's a problem too. You know what I mean? Like, give me something. Give me something. Daniel Warren Johnson. Next is another manga called Sakamoto Days. Basically, this is about a hitman, gone to seed, who now runs a konbini, a convenience store. And maybe needs to come out of retirement, but maybe not. And, very fun. It's just another fun one, and it's funny because he's like it does flashbacks and he's like a, young assassin and whatever and killing people. And, now he's like a real dad bod with a silly mustache. And, just seems very nondescript. And is trying to live a nondescript life, but gets sucked back into conflict here and there. It is something I like about this book is that, what got him out of the killing game was his wife. She wasn't his wife yet, and they were dating, and then she found out what he was doing for a living. And then she does it in a dumb way, like it's a dumb comic booky thing. She basically throws herself off a cliff, and he saves her, because he kind of has superpowers, kind of. He saves her, and then she's like, see how you felt and how you would have felt if I died, and like how distressing that was for you, and like, think about what your life would have been like if I had died, and like, wouldn't that have been horrible? She's like, that's what you do to other people for a job, is like, you take people out of their lives, and they don't have them anymore, and they're incredibly sad, and like, you ruin people's lives. And I'm like, yeah, thank you. Finally, we have a fucking story with a hitman in it, and it's like, maybe killing people for money is like one of the worst things you could do as a quote unquote job. I mean, what's worse than that? You know what I mean? Are there any jobs that are worse than killing people for money? I don't know. It's like just one of the few times that I've seen a book that's about an assassin that it's like, hey, maybe killing people is kind of a dick move. And maybe I cannot, condone that. So anyway, the comedy comes from, he's being stalked by assassins a lot. And he has to get rid of them, but he can't kill them. You know what I mean? Because his wife is like, no killing allowed, even if they're trying to kill you. The next is a very cute book called X-Men Days of Future Fun by Jeffrey Brown. So probably a lot of you know Jeffrey Brown from his Star Wars books like Vader's Little Princess and stuff like that. He's done some very cute Star Wars books. I knew Jeffrey Brown because he had done a lot of memoir type books. Trying to remember the titles of them, but I can't remember a single fucking one. But they're very emo, very indie books. A lot about relationships and stuff like that, which I really liked. Damn it, I can't remember any of the fucking names. That's crazy. I think they are now available like in a compendium edition, like a relationship trilogy or something like that. I think he had one called Deleted Scenes, which was more of a like straightforward memoir, which was pretty good. And then at some point he started, he did one of these Star Wars books, and I think it was a big hit. I think it was like a very giftable book, which probably helped. And his drawing style is very fun and actually really well suited to the material. And before he had done Star Wars, he had done a book, I think it was before or right around, he had done a book called Incredible Change Bots, which was like a Transformers parody, which was fucking hilarious. It's so good. There's like all these panels. I mean, one of the Transformers in the book, the Incredible Change Bots, is just a golf cart named Balls. And there's a joke I always think of from that book is there's an Optimus Prime type character, and one of the humans dies. This is probably also partially why I didn't like the Daniel Warren Johnson Transformers, is because I'm like, almost the same thing happened, but as a joke in this other book, which was a human character dies, and the Optimus Prime in the Incredible Change Bots book says, I often forget how fragile you humans are. And then it's like pause for a beat, and then it's like, of course, I'm a robot, so I can't actually forget anything, but you know what I mean. It's like, it's very funny. It's a great book. X-Men Days of Future Fun is kind of like if Jeffrey Brown did a Vader's Little Princess type book, but it was about the X-Men instead of being about Star Wars. And I liked it a lot. And it kind of made me like wistful for a thing that never was, which was like, what if Jeffrey Brown, if the Avengers movies had come out earlier, or he had been born just a little later or something, and like basically what if he had done Marvel instead of Star Wars? And I think that would have been more up my alley than Star Wars universe. I feel like I shit on Star Wars a lot, and like I don't hate Star Wars. I think I just sort of, I think for me, I saw the 3 movies, and when I was a kid, I wanted there to be like more Star Wars forever. And then as an adult, I'm like, you know what? I got the 3 movies that I like, and that's really the only Star Wars thing that I've truly loved. Anyway, I just sort of wish he had done that, and I'm probably the only person in the world who wishes that. Next is a manga called Homunculus, which I read 2 omnibus volumes of, so, 2 very thick volumes of. The first one I liked a lot. So here's the premise. A guy with sort of a mysterious past that we don't fully understand, but I gather he was some kind of, executive type, and now is homeless, lives in his car near a park, and hangs out with a bunch of homeless guys. And this guy starts approaching homeless people in the park and is saying, I would like to do a brain surgery on you. But it's a like questionable brain surgery. And I can't actually get I can't do it officially above board. But I want to do it to some people because I'm very curious about some of the effects and whatever. And he's like, now, I'll pay you a bunch of money if you let me do this brain surgery to you. And he's like, one of two things will happen. Like 99% of times, people have this done to them and they notice no effect. There's no difference. There's no change in their life. They live a happy life and they go on totally normal. The 1% of people basically wake up in some kind of psychosis and end up killing themselves. You know, if they wake up and they're having that problem, they all end up killing themselves. He's like, so it's not without risk, but I'm paying you a lot of money to do it. So, think about it. And our main character decides to go ahead and do it. So he has the brain surgery done on him in this guy's apartment. And the guy is weird. You know what I mean? The guy doing the brain surgery. He gets the brain surgery. He comes out and realizes that he's the psychosis type. And what he's seeing is he's like, every so often he sees someone and they look very strange. You know what I mean? They look twisted or warped or mutated, or like, for example, one guy he runs into looks like he's a giant robot. Stuff like, it's very odd. It seems random. Another person looks like they're made entirely out of liquid or sand or, eyeballs or shit. It's weird, right? The effects are weird and kind of unpredictable. And it sort of turns out that what he's seeing is sort of a visual manifestation of their sort of psychoses. And he discovers that because he can see this, he can sort of help these people through their psychoses. And, once he helps them through it, then they appear normal. And so, he sort of starts trying to help people. He kind of discovers this all by accident, right? And it's interesting. It's an interesting book. It's a weird premise, right? But, it's, I don't know, something different, something new. And so where the first omnibus volume leaves off, he discovers, because, he has to keep meeting with the guy who gave him the brain surgery. That's like a part of the deal. Because he's like, I need to check up on you and give you like cognitive tests or whatever. And he starts realizing that the guy who gave him the brain surgery looks strange to him as well. He's the one who looks like he's made out of liquid or something. A weirdly sentient, sometimes retreating liquid. And so, but he doesn't reveal to the brain surgeon guy that he sees him this way. Because he's like, I'm not sure if I should tell him what I'm seeing. You know what I mean? Or like, maybe it's better if he doesn't know that I know there's something wrong with him. Something's amiss. Something evil is happening with this guy. So he doesn't tell it. And they just kind of go on this way. And then the second volume starts. And so he meets this woman and she's like made out of sand or something. And he's trying to help her with her problem. And then it gets very rapey. And like, I don't mean like subtextually. It's almost like somehow by assaulting her, he fixes whatever's wrong with her. And it's really weird. And I don't know if I understood it correctly or if I missed something or like what was going on. But yeah, it was like, it was not good. It was very weird and very floaty in a way that I don't like, very not concrete. And also, I thought it was like going in, the premise from the first volume was great. And the second volume was terrible. It was just like, I don't know, the way things played out and stuff. And I was like, I'm not digging this. So it was a case of like, you know what? Had a lot of promise, good premise, started somewhere that I was very interested, and boy, it went somewhere that I was like, oh my God, like, no, thank you. And I have no idea, like, maybe it gets better. Like, maybe the next volume course corrects. I just don't, I think I was so turned off by it that I'm just not really willing to find out. It's not even that there was a rape in it. You know what I mean? It's more like that combined with my confusion of what was going on and like why this was happening, I didn't know why it was happening. And I couldn't tell, like, am I supposed to be thinking that this character is crazy and doing something he should be? Am I supposed to be like, this is a correct thing to do? You know what I mean? Or like, how is that? I don't know. It's like not only did I not, it's not like I want a book to tell me how to feel, but I want to know what's happening moment to moment. And it's like maybe it's an unreliable narrator problem. I'm not a big fan of the unreliable narrator in as much as like if a story is told from a narrator's perspective, and so that's the only things I know about the world are what this narrator says, uh, and I can't take any of it at face value. What I need to have happen is the author needs to be able to like signal to me, like in some way, is this character probably lying to you or to themselves or whatever? And if they can't do that, then I'm like, well, I'm just completely lost then. I might as well just be, I don't know. I have no framework with which to make the decision on whether or not to believe the character. And so I just that doesn't work for me. That's what I mean by floaty, I guess, is like, I don't know what was happening and what wasn't happening. And like, I don't know moment to moment action. I don't know what was going on. Next is a book called The Flip Side, which is a comic where a kid kind of wakes up in a upside down world with like weird monsters in it and stuff. And it's sort of based around, I guess, a real life story, and it has a lot of elements from the real life story, which is like the comics creator had a friend who died when he was really young, and kind of like how he dealt with that and stuff like that. It's always hard when you read a book like that because I'm like, hey, I didn't love the book, but at the same time, I was like I understand that like the process of trying to express an emotion or something, an emotion and an idea in your head is perfect, and then you put it on paper and it can't be perfect anymore, and that's a hard thing to deal with. And so sometimes I think, art comes, this is going to get real woo-woo. Art comes in that imperfection, right? And it's like, well, that's where art happens is like, yeah, those flaws, those imperfections, and like the molding of an idea which doesn't have form into something that does have form is where this all happens. At the same time, though, it's kind of tragic. When I was when I was being mentored, I'll call it, by Tom Spanbauer, he would always talk about how he's like, you shouldn't write like your big, if you are going to write a story about like your childhood was really tough or like something really horrible happened to you, he's like, don't do that as your first thing. He's like, because you don't have the skills yet. And sometimes it comes off as almost funny or like just really bad. It can be comical because it might be so bad. And he's like, and you don't want people to laugh at, a really serious story you're trying to tell. He's like, so, just, I'm not saying don't write it. I'm saying save it for, when you're ready, when you're like, okay, I've built up the skills. I can tell this story the right way and I can do a good job with it. I kind of think that's how I felt about this comic was like, I don't know if it's that he told it too early. It's just that like, I just felt really bad because I knew this was a story from his real life that really affected him and it was being expressed in this artistic, narrative. But it didn't work for me. And so, I don't know. I think the real life story and the creation of this book was really interesting to me, and the execution ultimately fell a little flat, and it makes it just more tragic because it's like, oh man, like, I don't know, but maybe it's how he wanted it to be. Maybe it did turn out the way he was picturing in his head, in which case it's okay. All right, well, That's a bunch more books. I guess this will have to either extend or not, depending on whether I feel like continuing this. So thanks for listening. Uh, I hope the sound, is okay and that you can accept my reliance on artificial brain. And I'll talk to you next time.
Asking the questions that nobody could. Like, where are the bone dogs and are they in harmony?